All right. Go ahead and start. So welcome all our visitors and guests, as well as those online. My name is Dane Quinn. I am the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Research at the Williams Honors College. And today is another offering of our lunchtime seminars. Right, so we try to have these the first Friday and the third Thursday, right, because it sounds good. And we give short talks, probably less than 10 minutes. Right, so you can come. I see some lunch on the table. Right, so you can come and eat lunch. If you're at home, you can eat lunch and learn something interesting from the faculty and visitors and guests here at the Honors College. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first guest. Our first speaker is Carrie Tomko. She is an instructor here in the Williams Honors College. Often teaches some of the most popular colloquia that we have. And I see a number of her students here because they just can't get enough. So, Carrie, take it away. All right, if you'll give me a second, let me share the screen and the slides, and we'll all be good to go.
Just as he's getting the technology set, I've been teaching in the Honors College over 16 years in the field of communication. Well, what I'll be talking about today is kind of my dream come true that started as a child. So today I'm going to share with you a speech on the benefits of farming. I'm a kid, not very athletic, but all my siblings, 4 of which attended this university, used to play ball, either baseball or softball. And I got dragged to the baseball field. Didn't like it. I would wander over to the cattle farm next door, right adjacent to the baseball field, and talk to the cows. Always wanting to be a farmer. It wasn't until 9 years, though, that I finally got my opportunity. Today, I'm not going to talk about so much farming and all the things I've done in farming, but some of the benefits. If you ever get a chance to hobby farm, spend a week on a farm, spend a day baling hay, here are some of the things you might gain from it. So on the slide today, that's a picture of my dad, who too always wanted to be a farmer. But at age 60, when he was about ready to retire, he got rheumatoid arthritis and never could. Typically, when we think of farming, we think of the bountiful food, the table, that can be filled with things for us to eat. But today I'm going to talk about 4 benefits, one of which is that, according to Ohio Farmer Magazine, the closer you are to dirt every day, the happier you are. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the multi-generational aspects of farming. Third, I want to share with you how fun it is to be connected with animals. And finally, physical fitness. So that first benefit of farming, we're not moving forward. Maybe I could just ask you to forward the slide.
Sometimes there's an on-off.
It seems to be in the on mode. Just
Here, I'll advance this.
So I'll go into it as he's working through the technology issues. So according to Ohio Farmer Magazine, a magazine I wrote for and had my own column in, there was an article that said that in an occupation, the closer you are to dirt, the happier. And obviously in farming, there's lots of dirt. That's my boyfriend on a tractor, cabless tractor, getting ready to move some different equipment and things. He is out in dirt. Next slide, if you could, Nate. There I am in some very dirty boots with a small jack donkey or male donkey. And I'm looking pretty darn happy. Look how dirty the walls look. Happiness abounds. Are we back to...
I think we're back on.
All right. And where's the dirt in this picture? That's my boyfriend after he and I alone, 2 people, harvested 777,000 pounds of hay. Inside those bales is fermented haylage that fed our 80 head of cattle, and that was the last bale stacked up. Where did all that hay grow? In the dirt. Pretty darn happy moment. So you don't think about dirt bringing happiness. You think you got to clean it up or get rid of it, but think about soil and the benefits that come from soil. The second point is about farming being for all ages. In this photograph, my boyfriend is on the right, his son in his 40s is in the middle, and his father, who was 89 years old the last time he drove a tractor, 89 years old, all enjoying a harvest that day, again, of hay. The hay is wrapped and then it ferments. But that was the last bale of the day. A lot of good times. Here's a young girl that visited our farm. Her name is Elise. And I don't know what magical power she had, but the cattle, these are all like 1-year-old heifer calves, they all joined around. It was like she was Dr. Dolittle. But she had some type of magic that she just connected with the cattle. Maybe we have battery problems.
Okay, no,
there we go. There we go. And there's an older gal visiting on the inside of the barn. She was able to be wheeled in her wheelchair up close and enjoy interactions within our barn facility. So young, old, all ages seem to have an interest in farming at times. Moving on to the third main point, and this has got to be my favorite, is the animal connection. This is how I dressed for school. That's how I dressed for being in the barn. Right there is a 2-year-old bull. He was my favorite. He was the first one I ever got to pierce his ear and put in his ear tag, affectionately named number 15. I have to say, although this isn't a benefit of barn, that was my last hug with number 15. He was slaughtered the next day, so he could be a filet mignon. There's a horse that lived on our farm, Magnum. He was a very tall horse. Somehow he knew to always bend down close to make eye contact. And this was a heifer calf that I had this year. Her name is Benatar, like as in Pat Benatar. And that was the first time she ate bread right out of my hands. I'm pretty darn happy. My fourth and final benefit of farming goes beyond the things that you can interact with. This is about your own physical fitness. Here I am milking a cow. It takes tremendous arm strength to do that 2 or 3 times a day. Other ways you keep physically fit, being out in the cool air, moving around. My boyfriend's in the heated cab with the tractor. I'm out there in boots and just a sweatshirt on because I'm moving so much, helping with a feeding act. Here's one that required a little balance. We were redoing the bottom of our barn with recyclable mats that my boyfriend created at his recycled plastic factory. He needed a counterweight. He said, jump up there and be my counterweight. I'm drinking a soda up there. In all, there are many benefits to farming. We think of food, but you can think of it as your own happiness, being close to the soil that makes it possible for us to eat. You can think of it in terms of interacting with every age. You can think of it as interacting with animals. But if you want to keep physically fit, farming is an opportunity. If you ever have a chance, a day, a month, a week, whatever it is, you might find that it really brings a lot of positive outcomes for you. That's my presentation. I'm going to turn the remote over to Dane.
Thank you. Well, so let's give Carrie a round. So we certainly have some time. Part of this is questions that you might have. And if you are online, right, I have a copy of the chat. You should be able to post a question, and then I can read it to you. Okay, so are there any questions from the audience? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you sell your produce at like countrywide farmers market or menus?
The question presented was, do we sell any of the farm products? When we had our large cattle operation, 80 head of grass-fed beef cattle, our farm products went directly to the Heinen's grocery store, where it was actually marketed under our name of Swan Meadow Farm. Because on top of having cattle, we also had swans. So not at this time, though. We downsized to a smaller set of livestock in a smaller situation. But yeah, we were very connected with our products. Good question.
Yeah.
Was it hard to maintain, like, I know you work with the honors college is hard to maintain like that work and also like the demands of the farm?
Yeah, the question from Erin, she asked if it was hard to have that balance between professional life and farming life. Probably students in the past could attest to the fact that I showed up in jeans and boots for school because there wasn't time to make that transition into a more professional outlook. There's been times when I've had injuries to things, although there's a benefit. Farming is known by many different sources as the third most dangerous job there is out there. You can get hurt. Currently, I am going through some physical therapy for my elbow because of an injury when I slipped and fell in the rain. So you've got to be able to put on your game face wherever you happen to be. So yeah, there is some balance to it, but it's worthwhile balance. Anyone else? Any online?
See anything online? No, but so how did you did you start small and then like get bigger and bigger? Did you go all in all at once? How did you get started?
Okay, how did I personally get started? My daughter was a senior in high school and I had been a journalist and I interviewed somebody in my past that had a farm. She came to me her senior year and wanted to see if she wanted to do large veterinarian as an occupation in her career. And so I had a meeting with somebody I interviewed, who happens to be my boyfriend now. And I said, Liz, my daughter Liz, meet me at this farm for this mandate pen, and the three of us will take a tour together. Liz didn't show up. She texted me and said she couldn't make it, and 9 years later, I was still farming. We grew up a farm boy in Indiana that had 10,000 laying hens, 30 head of cattle, 600 hogs, and 1,000 acres of crop. But when things fell apart in the 70s, he lost all his farm. He made it in the recycled the recycled plastics arena as just an entrepreneur that comes a lot of times with being farming. You got to figure out ways to sell yourself. And so his recycled plastics success has funded a lot of the farming. And so we grew it to it at 80 head of cattle.
I never knew.
Yeah, it's quite an adventure. And that's how I met him, because he holds so many patents. I interviewed him for an article. Interesting.
Right. Well, let's thank Carrie again. So I'll go ahead and introduce our next speaker, and then I'll go back and make all the changes online. Our next speaker comes to us from the Department of History, and he's also an instructor for local, Professor Michael Graham. I've known Michael for more than a few years. Michael actually is a musician locally, plays in a couple of bands, and bluegrass folk mostly, but some rock and roll and
Cowpunk.
Cowpunk. So he's a cowpunk. But like I said, I've gotten to know he and his family over the years. I think my youngest son had a crush on your daughter.
She's not the only one.
She was about 6 or 7 years older. So, but Michael Graham is going to talk to us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Just give me a second to get everything changed up.
Well, Dane sets things up. I specialize in the religious and cultural history of 16th and 17th century Europe, which may seem very narrow. So what I'm doing today is backing the way out and really looking at the sort of long view of history. No further ado, information revolutions in history. We have a tendency often when we're going through, stuff that really seems exciting to think, or in maybe good way or bad way, to think that this has never happened. No one's ever experienced anything like this. And here we see the evidence of this information revolution that's all around us. I see, someone has a smartphone on the table, and up here we have laptop computers and things like that. So we are definitely in an information revolution. To quote the Gershwins, how long has this been going on? Longer than you think, actually. We associate this revolution with computers, smartphones, laptops, various tablets, libraries in your pockets for a long time. But it really started way back in the 1840s with the telegraph. And East and West Coast of the U.S. were connected by telegraph in 1861. A few years later, there were transatlantic telegraph cables that made nearly instantaneous communication. And then that led to telephones, radios, television, and also ways to record sound, first on cylinders, and then eventually magnetic tapes. It's all part of the same thing, part of the same revolution. What's the common thread? How can we tie all these things together? Well, for one thing, it's electricity. These things all involve electricity. And they're also all about the storage and retrieval of information. So yeah, if you look on the lower right in this slide, the cloud, right? The cloud is the new big thing. I'm still not the cloud myself. But let's kind of back up and take a look at some older methods of information storage. To do that, we need to think of ourselves in a much broader historical context. And we need to imagine a world in which electricity certainly existed, but humans really had no way to control or manage it. It may be hard for us to imagine that world, but for most humans who have ever lived, it would not be hard to imagine that world at all, because we've only mastered electricity, really, in the last centuries, which is just a tiny blip in the history of humans. So what we should do, I think, is take electricity out of the picture then and see how information storage and retrieval. And actually, since Carrie was telling you about dirt, here's a good example of dirt being used in information storage and technology, or more specifically, clay. Because what you see here is an information storage and retrieval device from Mesopotamia, probably about 2000 BC or so. What you see there is cuneiform writing, one of the two first writing systems developed by humans, etched on a clay tablet. And I'm sure you guys look at that and you're very well read. You're probably thinking, oh, I recognize that. That's the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's just a little fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the first literary work of Western literature. At about the same time in Egypt, you get hieroglyphic writing developing. And here you see an example of that. In this case, on papyrus. Now, papyrus, that was a big improvement in information storage and retrieval technology. But I'll get to that in a second. I'm one slide ahead. So that we think of that as the first information revolution, the invention of writing systems. And that meant that for the first time, humans could learn something from other humans that they didn't meet with face to face. This allowed someone who's dead you can learn from because of these early systems. Papyrus actually ended up being a much more efficient system of information storage and retrieval than clay tablets. Clay tablets were very heavy and prone to breaking. Papyrus, you can just roll up like that and store. You can pack a lot more information. So it's like the difference between a very early computer that was big and cumbersome and a laptop computer that nowadays can probably store more than that early computer could. And in fact, it's papyrus that made the administration of the Roman Empire possible. Because with all the records that needed to be kept and all the things that needed to be set back and forth, to do that on papyrus. However, there is a drawback, at least a drawback that we would see, and that is try to find a particular quotation in a papyrus book. you've got to unroll it, you've got to know where to find it. You know, it's hard to access the specific information. So, in the first millennium or so, there was a solution to that problem developed called the codex. You might think of it as a book. But the advantage of the codex, of course, is the information is all sliced up in more manageable bits. You can turn pages, you can find, you know, if you can remember what page the information you want is on, you can get right to that page. So, codices, or codex, gradually replaced the scroll as a means of information. But that was kind of a slow process. I mean, people were still sometimes using scrolls in 1100 AD, and people had first started using the codex in some cases in like 300 AD. So it was a very slow change. I would describe it as more evolutionary than revolutionary. But it was, you know, it helped quite a bit. But, of course, the codices, like scrolls, took a long time to come. And, you know, many of those monks who were copying these, they did a good job. They were pretty smart. They were pretty competent. But inevitably, when you're copying down line after line after line, mistakes creep in. And so texts would get corrupted. Like, you know, imagine computer files that are corrupted and they become LPD. So really, by about 400 AD, information storage and technology, and information storage and retrieval technology, really hadn't advanced that much since the first information revolution. Then, in the city of Mainz, in the Holy Roman Empire, in Germany today, in the mid-1400s, a goldsmith and metalsmith by the name of Thomas Gutenberg, I'm sure you've heard his name before, he developed a process for mass-producing texts using little pieces of pipe made out of metal. This is what we call a printing press. And I know, yeah, so we can think of him as being like the Elon Musk or the Bill Gates of his era, right? Either over-invested and discovered there wasn't enough of a market for it. But the process that he developed and that other people had been working on at the same time soon spread and took over the information. This is what we think of as the second information revolution, the movable type printing press and the world that it essentially created. It made it possible to mass produce copies of texts, so fewer copying errors, although there could be errors in the actual print shot, which would then mass produce the errors. There's entertaining examples of that occurred. But these texts now are cheaper, they can spread much more widely. It helped to standardize languages because places where there was a printing industry, for example, London or Paris or Florence, the versions of the languages spoken in those places came to predominate because there were lots of things printed. And eventually, further improvements in information retrieval, these printed books would develop things like tables of contents or indices, more sophisticated page numbers. And that made it even easier to find the information you wanted. In, for instance, Bible printing in the mid-16th century, someone came up with the idea of separating the text by chapter and verse so that people could find specific verse. All these things made information retrieval much, much easier. Now, eventually, print would become steam-powered and then electrically powered. But by then, the second information revolution was pretty much over. And of course, the third information revolution has begun. That's the one we're in now. But one sort of grand point from all this is that the things we are going through are really not that unique. It's just some of the And this got me kind of thinking about, I know it's a concept in biology, but the concept of punctured equilibrium, where you have long periods of stasis where there's not a whole lot of change. And I think about, between about 2000 BC and about 1400, and then suddenly something happens and there's tremendous change in a short time. And we're going through one of those times because there has been so much technological change related to information storage and technology in the last 100 years. That is all I have to say for today. Thank you.
Again, we have time for questions from our in-person folk. And also, let's see, questions from people viewing this online. Any questions from the audience? Yeah.
So like the method of data storage and collection has been pretty similar as you just presented. Do you think that the way that humans go about spreading that information is slightly different? I know in our honor colloquium that's something that we talk about frequently about how people use that information in social media. Do you think that's changed over the ages and eras of humankind about how they actually take that information and spread it out?
Yeah, if I'm understanding your question, it's how people now in the electronic age, people can post a link or something like that and spread things out much more easily without having to have a physical thing there. Yeah, I mean that's things are scaled up tremendously as a result of really electronic communication embedded in these systems of information storage. However, there were examples of that in earlier eras. Like I think of this is actually something that really bedevils people who study books printed in the 16th and 17th century. In the 19th century, many of them came to be seen as collector's items, and into the 20th century. But rare book dealers found that there was greater profit in tearing out pages with illustrations and selling those separately. And so the books basically got torn up in many cases and broken down. And that happened even when those books were new, because people would say, "Oh, this book has a really interesting woodcut in it. I like that picture," and they tear it out and they put it up on their wall somewhere, or you're in the wall of a tavern or something like that. So there are ways of breaking up these products. Now I realize what you're talking about. The product is only broken up; it's just endlessly copied. Whereas in the era I'm talking about, once you had a book in your hand, you couldn't really copy it except by hand, so you revert it, but you could tear it up and spread it around. Yes, Carrie.
What about the issues of growing pain for the past technology? Scrolls, maybe the language changed. You said it's standardized language, but then it changed. I'm thinking more recently when the computer age first unrolled, we had floppy disks, and now those become archaic and they become almost unretrievable unless we upgrade to the next level. Any issues with the side effects of advancing?
One of the wonderful things about the codex is that as long as someone doesn't break it up or tear it up, it will last, I don't want to say forever, things eventually break down, but it will always be accessible to anyone who can read. This is one of the reasons some people love books specifically as tactile. Whereas, you worry about methods of electronic storage becoming obsolete. I've got a hallway full of cassettes. And my wife is frequently saying, "We can get rid of those, can't we?" And I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, there's stuff on cassette that I have here that I don't have anywhere else." Well, can you do it? Well, yeah, technically I have a cassette that doesn't work very well. Do. So, yeah, the technology becomes obsolete much more quickly now. 16th and 17th century print technology. I mean, it came faster than they used steam power presses. But once you produce the thing, anyone who's literate could use it. And even people who were illiterate, which was one of the reasons that frequently there were wood cuts and that sophisticated great
So I have a question I'd like to hear your thoughts on. If you look at the time between the first and the second, it was on the order of 4,000 to 5,000 years.
I'd say more like
2 to 3,000 years. And then if you look at the time between, say, the second and the third, now you're talking about maybe 600 years.
really, they almost overlap. You could say, I guess if you really want to be specific about it, I'd say the second information revolution wrapped up around about 700. But then, 150 years later, we're in the
Right. So I guess my question is do you think, so I look at that and I go, there were 3 zeros, and then there were 2 zeros. Is the next one going to happen in like 20 or 30 years, or do you think it'll be much longer? We'll be back to 200 or 300 years from now in terms of whatever the fourth revolution is.
Well, there is a pattern there. I don't know if we have enough data in the pattern to use it to predict something statistically. We're very confident. And as a historian, I'm always very impressed. But it does seem, obviously, the pace of change. It's also possible that at some point in the future, somebody is going to look at our era and draw a line somewhere, and they might say, well, the computer changed everything. It certainly did change a lot, but they may, create like a third information revolution before the computer, and then a fully starting with the computer. But in that case, there's not really going to be any gap.
Other questions? See if anything online. Nope. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, either live or virtually. And again, let's give our speakers a round of applause. So thank you both. This is exactly what I was hoping for, sort of short, engaging talks. Our last set of talks for this semester will be November 18th, and that will feature Hazel Barton from biology and James Egan from polymer science. So they'll be talking about, Hazel will be talking about, I believe, caves, and James will be talking about sustainability. Please come back.